Hello and welcome back to the channel. What we have for you today is an interview with an evolutionary psychologist called Rob Henderson, and this interview is actually conducted by one of the employees at Coos, Simon, who is also a PhD candidate for evolutionary psychology. So it's a very much academic talk between two academic heads, and it's a very interesting segment to listen to. I suggest you just have it playing in the background, and they talk about the dynamics of Tinder and the dating market, which is very much relevant to look to what most of you will be going through. So I think it's important to learn about some of the evolutionary psychology bases for how we choose to swipe left or right on Tinder.
Welcome to the first of a few interviews we're going to do on the Deep Dive podcast. Today we welcome Rob Henderson, who is an evolutionary psychology PhD candidate at the University of Cambridge. He most recently appeared on the Jordan Peterson podcast, on Michaela Peterson's podcast, and loads of other podcasts. He's written for Quillette, the New York Times. His main interests, if I have it correctly, are broadly in human nature, but more specifically in human status games, the psychology of politics, and most relevant to us is his interest in the sort of dating market, the modern dating market, and mate choice. So yeah, thank you for coming on, Rob.
Thanks, Simon. Great to be here.
Okay. So the first question I wanted to ask was, what got you interested in the modern dating market and mate choice? I know you're an evolutionary psychologist, so it's kind of bread and butter, but were there any particular experiences you had growing up which kind of helped develop your opinions on it? And is there anything that alarms you or interests you in particular?
Yeah, well, of course, yeah, like you said, it's something that I'm interested in, as you know, it directly relates to a lot of the research that I read and that I conduct and so forth. But yeah, I mean, of course, I think it's a naturally interesting topic, especially for people who are young. I'm a little older than you, but I still, I'm relatively young. And I guess I'm just old enough though to witness the shifts that have occurred, specifically the rise of dating apps, starting at around 2012. At that point, I was actually stationed in Germany, so I was enlisted in the military before going to university. But at that point, I was seeing. I think there was a slight delay. The dating app really took off in the U.S., and there's always kind of this delay on this side of the pond. But yeah, in Germany was starting to percolate. But I was still seeing like it was normal to go out. Most people were meeting their romantic partners through friends, through school, through family, or even just at like bars or whatever, coffee shops, in person. And I think even at that point in 2012, 2013, which is when I was like, in my early 20s, really going out a lot, it was seen as still kind of odd to meet someone through the internet or through an app. Even Tinder was still kind of this cute, like semi-scandalous thing that people would download for fun and almost joke around about it. And over the last decade now, we're seeing that it's all encompassing, it's pervasive now, to the point where it's flipped, and now it's more unusual to meet someone in person than through an app.
In dating apps, there's just such a huge gender ratio bias when it comes to just being on the apps themselves. But one thing I noticed when doing research on dating apps is that in the US, the gender ratio is 78-22 on Tinder, but in the UK it's 90-10. So in the UK,
female,
it's so much, so 10 being female. That's the male to female ratio. Yeah. Okay. So 90% of users in the UK are women, whereas it's 78% in the US, which is just bizarre to me. Like how from being from the United States, like how could you possibly explain that? Why is the UK so much more saturated? Is it over for British men? Is what I'm asking.
I don't know. I mean, one possibility is that women in the U.S. are, I mean, I don't know, depending on how you look at it, more liberated and more willing to use these apps, whereas maybe British women are more apprehensive or skeptical of their utility. Or it's possible that, I mean, so there's this very interesting book, Cheap Sex by Mark Regnerus, who's a sociologist. He he sort of goes in depth. I mean, this book is, I don't know if I call it outdated. I mean, it's 2014, 2015, something like that. But he observed how shocked he was that any woman would use a dating app simply because, like, all of the sort of social science and evolutionary science that we know is such that women tend to be much less interested in short-term romantic encounters than men. And dating apps, especially Tinder early on, was specifically designed for that. I mean, it marketed itself as like this. I mean, I don't know if they overtly did it, but everyone was kind of like, wink, wink, we know that what Tinder is for. It's that hookup app. And I mean, really, all the apps are Tinder. Let's be honest. But like, you can sort of see that, like, okay, so he makes this point that, like, okay, so why are women using these apps? Like, there's something going on here. It's kind of interesting and surprising that they would. And part of the surprise is that women tend to they sort of experience more opportunities in their day-to-day lives, right? Like, women get hit on and women get catcalled or whatever. Like, basically men will sort of attempt to make themselves available to women in everyday life. I don't know if it's still that way now. Things have changed so much with the apps and everything, and with the pandemic and so on. But generally, that's how it goes. A lot of these guys do tend to, well, it can express itself differently. I think some guys do. They're very sort of shallow and fleeting in that way, where if they get a rejection, then it's, they just move on. And I think a lot also derive a kind of a pleasure over sort of winning someone over, and sort of seducing them in that way. But just in order to have sex with them and then to not speak with them again, just to sort of, like, I mean, in a way, especially for narcissists, this is sort of a validation of their self-image, is like, can I get this person to have sex with me? And then once it happens, then it's like, okay, that's all I needed, and they can move on. And so, yeah, there is that element of it. And also, like, the dark triad types tend to be, I mean, both men and women tend to find it alluring in some way. There are multiple reasons for this. I mean, so there's a famous study from a few years ago, basically showing that women were shown like an image of a guy, and like basically everything was controlled for. There was two conditions, and it was just that in one condition they were aware that he scored very highly on dark triad traits, and women rated him as much more attractive than the man without the dark triad traits. Everything was was the same except one guy. And then there's other research showing that people who score highly on dark triad traits, I mean, so there's a question, well, why is this the case? Well, I mean, there was another study basically showing that people who score high on dark triad traits invest more in their appearance. And so women who score high, they spend more time on makeup application. They probably buy sort of more expensive and more high quality cosmetics. And men who are high on these traits, especially narcissism, spend more time in the gym, or maybe pay for more expensive haircuts and so on. So, they adorn themselves in a certain way. And they even had people, like, they had people take the dark triad test, took pictures of them, and then showed people images of these, people who score high versus not so high. And people consistently rated the dark triad people higher because of their appearance, because of the way they adorned themselves, the way that they dressed. And then they had the same study, but they, like, within the same set of studies, they had them they had the women remove the makeup and tie their hair back in the same style as everyone else. They had the men, I think, wear like just a plain t-shirt. They couldn't wear whatever they would normally wear. And in this case, it was like the effect was removed. So just based purely on appearance, dark triad trait types were not any more attractive than people who weren't high on the dark triad. But there does seem to be a large part of the difference seems to be in the way that they style themselves and invest in their appearance in various ways. So, I mean, they are good at short-term mating and sort of shallow relationships.
Okay, well, I wonder if that relates to what you were saying with Michaela Peterson on her podcast about how if a man appears with other women in normal academic studies, like outside of Tinder, they tend to find the men more attractive because it's like, well, this woman is competition to me. But then when they have on Tinder profiles, when the man has another woman in his profile, or it's one of the pictures, it doesn't have that effect. And in fact, I think I remember you saying it had the opposite effect. Is that right?
Yeah. So the finding, so the classic finding, this is David Buss and others have basically shown that, generally speaking, if you show a guy by himself, a guy with other guys, and then a guy with women, and then ask women like, how attractive do you find this man, or how interesting do you find him? And women generally find the man who's surrounded by women to be more interesting. And the basic interpretation of this is sexual, or rather social proof. You know, like, oh, well, if these women are willing to be around this guy, then, you know, probably he's interesting, or he's not, or at the very least, he's not like a crazy person. So, you know, if these women are willing to be around him, maybe I should learn more about him.
Yeah.
But then on dating apps, and I think it was specifically Tinder, having a guy, if a guy shows a picture of himself surrounded by women in a Tinder photo, women tend to rate him as I don't know if they rate him as less attractive, or they're just like less willing to meet him or go on a date with him.
Okay.
And, you know, it's sometimes hard to disentangle that, because like maybe you can ask in those studies, like, do you find him attractive? And they'll say no, even though they do. Because what they're really saying is like, they're trying to express that, like, I don't want to meet him, you know, because I don't assume that I assume he's unserious, or that he's only interested in a fling or a hookup or something. And, you know, even if, so basically, it's that there is that sort of asymmetry there, such that, like, if you're on using these apps, maybe like surrounding yourself with women is not the ideal strategy.
So, what would your advice be for men who, because I think men are losing out throughout, you know, the spectrum, like the attractiveness spectrum. You've got the majority of men who we of course focus on, who don't get the same opportunities they might used to, but we've also got a small percentage of, you know, quite attractive men at the top who just have all the options in the world, and they just can't. It's like the what was the word the choice paralysis you were talking about earlier. What would your advice be for men who are in that position, and who want to end this paralysis that they might be in?
Well, so are we talking specifically about these sort of highly desirable men who feel trapped? I mean, I know these guys. I mean, I talked about this with Jordan on his podcast about these, like, one friend of mine who had more than 20,000 matches, and he did get into a relationship. Although I never actually asked him, like, why did you? Because, like, to me, it's just, you know, I'm in a relationship. Like, that seems to be like a natural thing, is to just, like, the thing, like, you see these very, like, high status celebrities, right? Like George Clooney got married. Like, your favorite athlete is probably married. Like Tom Brady, you know, these guys, they get married, they settle down. And I think that's just like a natural human inclination after a while, is like, even if you do have all the money and status and fame, there is something sort of dissatisfying. And, you know, at first it can be a lot of fun to be able to have a lot of hookups, but very few guys I know, like, at the end of like a hookup with someone they don't really care about, feel like good about themselves. And there's that sort of distinction in the brain's dopamine pathways, this distinction between wanting and liking. And you can really want something and not like it, which is a sort of classic finding among drug addicts, say. Drug addicts will search to get their fix, but then once they actually get high, they actually don't like it that much, or not as much as they expected they would. But we're still sort of driven to do these things. I mean, people who are on diets, for example, they really want to eat something like a pastry, but then they eat it and they find that they don't actually enjoy it as much as they thought they would. And this is true for hookups too, for sex. And so, I mean, part of it, I think, is just sort of aging out of it. You get a little older, and it's just natural to kind of want to get out of it.
We should probably bring things to a close there in terms of YouTube, anyway. So, just to sort of tail off, how can viewers find your work? What are you up to at the moment?
I mean, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm pretty active there at Rob K. Henderson. So Rob, the letter K, Henderson, and I just launched a Substack a week ago. So it's basically a new and improved version of my newsletter that's been going on for about 2 years now. So just robkhenderson.substack.com, and that's where most of my writing lives. Substack and Twitter, and you can find my stuff there.
Oh, perfect. Right. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been a really, really interesting chat. I've enjoyed that tremendously. So I'll stop that there. But for those on Patreon, there will be, as I said earlier, there will be a sort of brief Q&A where I'll be asking Rob your questions from Patreon and from the YouTube thread. So yeah, I'll see you there.